Bo had just committed an earth-shattering act and instantly became the top fugitive of the Triad. She had secretly taken the Triad leader's newborn baby, only 15 days old, from the hospital. The Triad set up a massive manhunt for her, but she was clever enough to evade them for over 10 days. Hellion was furious, issuing orders early on. When you find her, beat her to death. Though he seemed enraged, with clenched teeth, his words made his subordinates hesitate. No, Bo had no connection to Hellion. He had someone he loved. Bo was merely a good friend of the baby's mother. Annan had suffered enough from the Triad, and before she died, she had held onto Bo's hands tightly and entrusted her. Don't let the child follow him. Hellion was not someone Bo could afford to provoke. He was as elusive as a dragon. Even though Bo and Annan were as close as sisters, she had only met him once at the wedding. Since she had heard he was a ruthless Triad leader, she didn't make any effort to get close to him. When Annan introduced them, she merely gave a polite nod, saying, "Pleasure to meet you." All she remembered was the groom standing among the colorful flowers, always with a calm and serene demeanor. He nodded slightly at her and said, "Bo." She had taken advantage of the situation. Annan's death had hit Hellion hard, and in his moment of vulnerability, Bo had fulfilled Annan's final request. Though her actions had been so secretive, Hellion knew. His command had stirred both the underworld and the authorities into action. Once the bounty on her head hit 6 figures, Bo began to feel anxious. That night, Bo went downstairs to throw out the trash when suddenly, a man leaped out from the bushes. He looked like a homeless man, with a face covered in stubble. Only his teeth were disturbingly white. He opened his mouth and called out, "Bo." She stood there frozen for a while, staring at his familiar yet unrecognizable face. Finally, she saw through the dirt and grime to someone she vaguely knew. These past days, she had been dressing like a mummy every time she went outside. Even her own mother wouldn't recognize her if she were standing right in front of her. Yet, this man had managed to spot her. Bo didn't hold back her blunt words. "Lu Chengyuan, how did you end up looking like this?" They had grown up in the same military compound, but even as a kid, he was no good, mastering the art of cheating, stealing, gambling, and indulging in all vices. People say that children from poor families grow up fast, but in his case, he just started squandering early. She had supported him financially a few times and later switched to trying to save his soul, hoping books like the Bible and Chicken Soup for the Soul would steer him back onto the right path. But Lu Chengyuan's soul was too far gone. Even God couldn't guide him. In response, he had smashed a giant hole in her window. From that moment, Bo decided he was beyond redemption, a lost cause. Then he dropped out of high school and left for Shenzhen. After that, he disappeared from Bo's life. Out of old ties from childhood, Bo cooked him a bowl of noodles, adding plenty of ingredients. Of course, she didn't forget to mock him. "Is this how you're returning home in glory?" He let out a chuckle, looking at Bo. "Guess why I ended up like this?" "Because you've seen a ghost." Lu Chengyuan picked up a strand of noodles with his chopsticks, like someone who had to maintain an air of elegance even when facing food. He tasted it slowly and said, "I got into a fight." Bo responded disinterestedly. That wasn't surprising. For him, fighting was as routine as eating. Did you fight a monster or a superhero? Why come all the way here to report it to me? He raised his eyes and glanced towards the baby's room. "I fought the assassin sent by the child's father." Bo fell off her chair with a loud thud. Lu Chengyuan, ranked 9th in the Triad, was known as 9th Master Lu. Handsome, suave, and charming, except for his current disheveled appearance, due to just having killed 3 assassins. This was the grand twist of Lu Chengyuan's tale. He didn't bother helping Bo up. After finishing the last strand of noodles, he said, "You have to return the child. Otherwise, I can't protect you." His eyes carried both a command and a threat, and the domineering air between his brows resembled Hellion for a fleeting moment. But she refused to give in. Grabbing the baseball bat by the door, she decisively swung it down. Lu Chengyuan reacted quickly, not only dodging it but also grabbing hold of the bat. You think you can escape the leader's grasp? If I hadn't been holding them off, you'd have died 10 times over by now. Ha, I'm lucky to have a long life. Why don't you let me die 10 times and show off? No matter how hard she struggled, she couldn't break free from Lu Chengyuan's grip. In her desperation, she kneed him viciously in the groin. Lu Chengyuan didn't make a sound, but his eyebrows twitched slightly, making Bo wonder if he even had anything there. She felt a little guilty and didn't dare meet his eyes. Yes, she shouldn't have taken out her frustration on him. She was just feeling utterly miserable. She hadn't expected Hellion to be so heartless. And Nan once said, sometimes he can be ruthless enough to hurt himself. And the rumors agreed. Bo had always known just how merciless Hellion could be with his enemies. She just thought that she would be an exception, because she had seen Hellion's sorrow with her own eyes. When Nan was buried, no one was allowed to lift a shovel. Hellion used his bare hands to dig through the soil until they bled, digging until he was utterly exhausted, silently shedding tears. Isn't there a saying that love extends to all associated with the beloved? She was Nan's best friend. Shouldn't she have been afforded a little leeway? But no, to Hellion, no one mattered except Nan. Lu Chengyuan took her to meet Hellion, giving her fatherly advice along the way. Just treat him like an emperor. No need for the whole kneeling and bowing thing, but don't look him in the eyes. His icy gaze will leave you frozen for days. Then, he patted Bo's shoulder and promised, don't worry, with me here, he won't harm you. Bo felt that for Hellion to forgive her, she'd have to cut herself into 10 pieces, or perhaps Hellion would personally do it. She didn't fully trust Lu Chengyuan's reassurances. In Hellion's presence, she didn't dare act out. She sat quietly in the corner of the sofa, doing her best to minimize her presence. Hellion didn't sit. He leaned casually against the desk, holding a steaming cup of coffee, coldly eyeing the submissive Bo and Lu Chengyuan, who was lounging with one leg crossed, leisurely peeling sunflower seeds. In the study, the two men presented a stark contrast, one exuding cold indifference, the other playing the rogue. The atmosphere was eerily tense. With her head lowered, Bo could see Hellion's soft white silk slippers sinking into the thick carpet. He wasn't wearing socks, and half of his foot was exposed. She shifted her gaze slightly and caught sight of Lu Chengyuan's bare feet. Yes, bare feet. He had actually taken off his shoes. Bo felt that if she didn't end this silent trial soon, there was no telling what else Lu Chengyuan might remove. Just as she was about to speak, Lu Chengyuan suddenly brushed the seed husks off his hands onto hers, as if taking the opportunity to be inappropriate. He said, "Big brother, Bo doesn't know better. Don't take her too seriously. She was only fulfilling the promise she made to your wife. You can disregard my face, but surely you can't ignore hers, can you?" Hellion shifted his leaning position slightly and said in a low tone, "Who knows when she might try something sneaky with a child again." The threat in his words was unmistakable, and Bo could feel a chill running down her spine. She despised men like Hellion who concealed their emotions, always making her want to rip the mask from his face. But she heeded Lu Chengyuan's advice and didn't look at Hellion, not even once. She could daydream about torturing Hellion, but in reality, she had no choice but to act submissive. Lu Chengyuan chuckled. "She's not exactly a mastermind. She doesn't have that kind of skill. If you're worried, leave her in my hands. I'll keep an eye on her for you." Even though Bo was unhappy that no one had asked her, the mastermind herself, she knew that Lu Chengyuan was a shield, so she involuntarily scooted closer to him. Suddenly, she felt Hellion's gaze land on her, pinning her in place like a nail. As if possessed, she raised her head and met Hellion's eyes. He seemed to be contemplating Lu Chengyuan's proposal, lazily spinning the coffee cup in his hand, round and round. Has anyone ever said that Hellion was the most terrifying in these moments? His languid demeanor made it seem like he could destroy someone with a flick of his wrist. He said, "Miss Bo, you'd best hold onto Lu Jiao tightly. Behave yourself, or next time, You won't be so lucky. Then he turned to Lu Qingyuan and said, You too, be careful. Don't think your little tricks can escape me. The warning was clear. It made Bo feel that Helian's mention of little tricks didn't just refer to Lu Qingyuan saving her. Sure enough, Lu Qingyuan's expression shifted slightly, and he clenched his fist behind his back. Once they got in the car, Lu Qingyuan's face remained clouded with anger. They had been driving for a while when he suddenly slammed his fist onto the steering wheel, cursing, Damn it! I knew he had planted someone near me. Bo jumped at his outburst, thinking to herself how terrifying the world of organized crime was. Always fighting, both inside and outside. Never a moment of peace. No wonder Nan refused to let her child stay with Helian. Who knows what kind of brutal, violent life the kid would grow up to face? Lu Qingyuan suddenly turned to her, beaming, I'm not usually like this. Go ahead and ask around. Everyone knows that Ninth Master is gentle, kind, and downright adorable. Bo responded politely, Thank you, gentle, kind, and adorable Ninth Master, for your protection. Lu Qingyuan leaned over the steering wheel and laughed heartily, clearly satisfied and proud of himself. She never would have guessed he had risen so high in the ranks. Being Ninth Master of the Triads was no small thing. In the underworld, it was said to be on par with the power of ancient warlords. He had fully embraced his role as a nouveau riche. His house sat halfway up a mountain, and as soon as the car entered the gates, 20 black-suited bodyguards lined up in 2 rows, simultaneously greeting Ninth Master and Miss Bo. The mansion sprawled over 900 square meters, decked out in European decor, lavish and extravagant. Even the smallest decoration was worth a fortune. It was so garish that if Bo didn't call it out, she'd feel insincere. Lu Qingyuan had a perfectly good reason for the vulgarity. It's all to give you a sense of security. It shows you that Ninth Master is rich and powerful, so whenever you need to act a little high and mighty, you'll know you won't suffer any losses as long as you stay by my side. Even the boss would think twice before laying a finger on you if I didn't give the green light. Bo chuckled, feeling genuinely reassured. She put her luggage in the room. When she came back out, Lu Qingyuan had already showered and was standing by the fish tank, wearing nothing but a towel around his waist, sprinkling breadcrumbs into the water. She figured that for him to rise to his current position, he must have endured a lot. But the reality was even more severe than she'd imagined. His back was covered in countless scars, crisscrossing over each other, a shocking sight. As a kid, he rarely lost a fight and prided himself on being a tough guy who bled but never cried. He had always claimed he didn't need school to make a name for himself, and often looked down on Bo for spending her days memorizing vocabulary. Even when he left for Shenzhen, he had carefully chosen the date, right when Bo had her mock exams, so they never got to say goodbye. All he left her was a letter that said, Wait for me. I'll return on a cloud of glory to marry you. She had chalked it up to teenage banter, the kind of joke a boy would make when he was young and carefree. Sure, they had shared a deep bond, but there wasn't anything more than that, right? Yet, thinking back to these days of running and hiding from her pursuers, his silent support, and all he had done for her in the shadows, she couldn't help but feel her heart waver. Some unwanted, messy thoughts began to creep in. After all, romance novels often spoke of the difficult choices between love and power. What's more important, an empire or the woman you love? And Nan had been the casualty of a gang war. It wasn't that Helian didn't love her. He just couldn't balance both love and duty. Lost in thought, Bo was startled when Lu Qingyuan suddenly showed her his scarred back, trying to gain some sympathy. Are you feeling sorry for me? A leopard never changes its spots. She joined him at the fish tank, standing beside him as she fed the fish. And Nan once said all you triad bosses have 10 or 8 women each. Surely you've got plenty of people feeling sorry for you. Instead of being offended, he was delighted, tossing a handful of breadcrumbs into the tank. The fish scrambled for the food, splashing water everywhere. Bo let out a small yelp as she jumped back. Lu Qingyuan, on the other hand, gazed at the fish tank, grinning. The glass was transparent, and it reflected nothing back at him, but he was admiring himself as if it did. Not every boss has 10 or 8 women. Take me, for example. Although I'm incredibly handsome, deep down, I'm a one-woman man. Bo knew she should be more polite when talking to her benefactor, but she couldn't resist teasing him. Sorry, I don't see the handsome part, nor the one-woman part. He insisted. Do you remember how I've only ever eaten freshwater fish since we were kids? One time you tricked me into eating some sea fish, and I ended up throwing up until my bile came out. I was bedridden for 2 whole days. You can tell from my eating habits how loyal I am when it comes to relationships. She didn't remember this at all, and wondered how someone as sharp as him could have been tricked into eating sea fish. Still, she watched as the light reflected off the water in the tank and danced in his eyes, like scattered sunlight. For some reason, Bo didn't say she had no memory of the incident. Instead, she gave a small nod. Later that night, she still couldn't quite believe everything that had happened. She sat up in bed, turning on the lamp. The lace lampshade cast intricate patterns across the room, covering every inch of space Lu Chengyuan had meticulously arranged. Hugging her knees, Bo stared blankly ahead. And Nan was a lesson from the past, but now, not only could she not keep her baby away from the mafia, she had gotten herself tangled up in it too. In the end, she was simply afraid of death. Yet, her pride made it impossible for her to leech off Lu Chengyuan's protection indefinitely. A day or 2 is fine. She could rationalize it as hospitality. But if this continued, she herself might start to suspect she was on the path to becoming his mistress. So, she begged Lu Chengyuan to arrange a job for her, fully prepared to accept any disreputable position. Sure enough, she followed him into an entertainment venue, one of the establishments under his control. From the madam to the girls and security guards, they practically lined up in a procession to greet them. Before he even spoke, she was forced to down 2 drinks as a flock of women gathered around him. Bo couldn't stand firm in the crowd. She wanted to seize the opportunity to slip away, but to her surprise, he held her hand tightly and announced, "From today on, Miss Bo will be working here. Make sure you all take good care of her for me." She was stunned. If it hadn't been for the crowd, she might have slapped him. Seeing her sour expression, Lu Chengyuan put on a serious face and said, "Don't underestimate this job. It's not something just anyone can do. Not only do you need a top-notch face and figure, but the skills have to be exceptional." Wearing pointed high-heeled shoes, Bo lifted her leg and aimed straight for Lu Chengyuan's face. He was half reclining on the sofa, the angle perfectly positioned for her to stomp on him, and her heel landed squarely on the bridge of his nose. Blood started to trickle from his nose, and only then did he cry out, "Was that necessary for just a joke? Do you really think I'm that kind of beast?" He clutched her shirt in the chaos to wipe his nose, but still didn't get angry. Instead, he pouted like a child. The others in the room saw the scene unfold and immediately understood what was happening. The madam, who was adept at reading people, quickly listed a series of vacant positions, remarking that Miss Bo, with her refined demeanor, was clearly better suited for office work and was only gracing them with her presence out of respect. Bo had always struggled with handling such people, so she found an excuse to retreat to the restroom. The venue's hallway was deliberately narrow, designed to evoke intimacy. If 2 people walked side by side, it would feel inherently suggestive. She saw someone approaching and stopped, planning to wait for them to pass before continuing. As the figure drew closer, she realized it was Helian. The dim lighting had blurred his features when he was further away. Otherwise, Bo would have fled earlier. Helian also stopped, standing near a private room with a slightly ajar door. Inside, shadows moved as a woman's coquettish voice called, "When are you coming back, Lord Lian?" Helian had a double surname, but in their world, intellectuals were rare. Many mistook his surname to be Helian, with his first name being Lian, so he was often addressed as Lord Lian. Helian never bothered to correct them. Bo hadn't expected him to frequent such a place. Wasn't a man who had just lost his wife supposed to be mourning with his child in his arms or reminiscing about his late wife in front of her photo? She peeked through the crack of the door, seeing scantily clad women and sleazy men inside. The stench of smoke and alcohol wafted out even from a hallway. "Lord Lien," she addressed him in the same manner, hoping he would quickly return to his room. But he didn't. One hand rested on the doorknob, while his gaze remained fixed on her. He nodded slightly. The one hanging light above them seemed to haze over for some reason, making her vision blur little by little. Bo stepped back until her back was pressed against the cold wall. Hellion remained standing there, staring at her without any discernible expression. Bo swallowed nervously as he shifted his foot slightly. Suddenly, Lu Chengyuan's casual voice echoed from the end of the hall. "Hey, big brother, enjoying yourself here too?" The twists and turns were sudden, with no warning at all. Despite Lu Chengyuan's reluctance to stare at Bo for long, he didn't perceive any glimmer of maternal love in her. Yet, Hellion spoke up, casually chatting with Lu Chengyuan, starting off with recent unrest in various places and mentioning the sudden deaths of several big shots. Both of them seemed distracted. Then, out of the blue, Hellion said, "I have a ready-made job for you." Boer's heart skipped a beat, but he didn't specify what the job was. Instead, he added, "The baby is quite spoiled, but after being cared for by others for about 10 days, he cries when he can't see them." Lu Chengyuan was quick to argue, rolling up his sleeves to reveal his watch. "This place is a den of iniquity. It's not suitable for decent girls." He walked out but paused at the door. "If there's nothing urgent, come back the day after tomorrow." Bo was left with a grim face, exchanging worried glances with Lu Chengyuan. When Lu Chengyuan took her to a restaurant for dinner, she was still in shock over the earlier conversation. "He wouldn't take the opportunity to get rid of me, would he?" she asked, her voice laced with concern. "Big brother might think it's safer for you to be under his watch than mine," Lu Chengyuan replied. He seemed to be trying to reassure her, searching for words as he munched on peanuts and sipped on strong liquor. "Actually, Big Brother is a particularly sentimental person, to the point where he can give up things you can't even imagine." He seemed to recall something, suddenly falling silent, a peanut suspended on his chopsticks for quite a while. He had drunk too much and was slightly tipsy, leaving Bo to drive. She felt uneasy as he slouched in the passenger seat with his eyes half closed, still watching her. His gaze was different from Helien's. It carried a clear, naked emotion that made her uncomfortable. Bo licked her dry lips several times and finally heard him ask, "Do you know how Big Brother fell for sister-in-law?" With her rich imagination, she suddenly had a bright idea and asked, "You're not also fond of a nan, are you?" He didn't answer, but simply smiled. At the traffic light, unable to endure his teasing any longer, she turned her head and snapped, "Hey." He took advantage of her distraction and leaned in for a kiss. Though it was sudden, it was a soft brush of lips, as delicate as a butterfly's wings fluttering before takeoff. Bo's face instantly turned red, and she gripped the steering wheel, too angry to speak. He just kept laughing, asking, "Who do you think I like?" In truth, she had some suspicions, but never expected him to be so bold. Perhaps it was a legacy of the triad, with every man being domineering. Bo naturally knew how Hellion had fallen for a nan. It was during their vacation in Australia, where he had reportedly caught a glimpse of her from afar and then couldn't forget her. Without even courting her, he directly sent someone to deliver a marriage proposal, reminiscent of Liu Zhenhua from Romance in the Rain. This approach perfectly matched a nan's taste. Back in the dormitory, while renting movies, a nan had praised Liu Zhenhua endlessly, viewing the elegant leading man and his rival as absolute dreamboats. Bo was determined to ignore Lu Chengyuan, otherwise, he might think she was easy to bully. Even if he was the ninth master, there had to be some boundaries. In the middle of the night, he knocked on her door, sounding pitiful as he complained about being hungry. Fearing he would wake others, she cracked the door open just a bit. "Didn't you eat a lot at the restaurant?" "I was too busy drinking. You saw it. I only stuffed a few peanuts into my mouth." He was a true rogue, and it seemed he was ready to squeeze himself through the door if she didn't let him in, exuding an aura of "I'll get in through any crack," even the tiniest one. She tiptoed to the fridge, and he followed her, mumbling about this and that, what she shouldn't eat, what shouldn't go in the microwave, and eventually said, "The noodles you made last time were pretty good." Bo couldn't help but laugh. She hadn't expected him to be so picky, yet here he was, reminiscing about a bowl of noodles. That was her one signature dish. Every time Nan came back from having bad takeout, she would complain it was still better than Bo's noodles. She chopped a bit of onion and added it, but the smell made her eyes sting with tears. Seeing her reddened eyes, Lu Chengyuan mistakenly thought she had been crying. "I promise I won't bully you anymore," he said. Bo watched him eat, but didn't respond. After a moment, she asked, "Do you think I should stay there to take care of the baby?" His chewing suddenly stopped, and he looked up at her with an expression she had never seen before, as if he didn't recognize her. Bo felt anxious and turned back to the kitchen. "Let me clean up." He pushed the bowl away. "I'm full." He had barely eaten half, but Bo hesitated before dumping the leftover noodles into the trash. Lu Chengyuan abruptly stood up, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. She didn't understand his sudden mood swing. Perhaps it was because he was so used to being pampered that he felt embarrassed. She decided to ignore him. Until she arrived at Helian's place, Lu Chengyuan hadn't said a word to her, acting like a sulking child. The baby was easy to handle. He spent most of the day sleeping, and when he was awake, he was usually sucking on a bottle. Bo found herself with plenty of idle time, but didn't dare wander around, so she lingered in the nursery. Occasionally, Helian would come in to check on the baby, gently reminding her, "Keep a close eye on him." The implication was clear. If something goes wrong, it's your responsibility. She tried to be polite, providing tea and snacks. On her way to the bathroom, she passed by the study and caught sight of Lu Chengyuan looking at Nan's photos, his expression sorrowful. A sense of melancholy washed over her, making her ponder how many men in this world remained so infatuated. Later, she saw him dozing on the desk. Though the air conditioning was on, there was still a chill. Gathering her courage, she quietly walked in and draped a blanket over him. Bo was sweating with nerves, as if she were going into battle, but deep down, she felt an indescribable joy. To her surprise, Lu Chengyuan came to pick her up in the evening. As soon as he entered the room, he called out, "Big brother, can we wrap up? I'm waiting for Bo to have dinner." Someone had already informed Helian, who folded his newspaper and replied coolly, "I just hired a new chef from Guangdong. Let's see how he cooks." The table was filled with dishes, and only Bo was focused on eating, which she genuinely enjoyed since she loved Cantonese food. Helian seemed uninterested, while Lu Chengyuan had little appetite. The two brothers engaged in conversation, leaving Bo unable to interject. She simply listened, noting their good rapport. On the way back, she fell asleep in the car. In a half-dream, she heard Lu Chengyuan on the phone, sounding fierce. "Is it just about that? He thinks I won't act because he's big brother." Suddenly, he noticed Bo with her eyes slightly open, gazing at him in confusion, and hung up. "Did I wake you?" She wondered how much he thought she had heard. Bo sat up straight. "You men are really scary. You say one thing but mean another." He had a mocking smile. "What's this? You had a nice meal, and now you're defending someone else." His words were somewhat thoughtless. There was no clear distinction between allies and outsiders. Lu Chengyuan had overestimated himself. But Bo held her temper, guessing he hadn't let go of his anger from a few days ago. To lighten the mood, she joked, "You're not sending me there to be a spy, are you?" She laughed at her own joke. Lu Chengyuan chuckled too, half seriously. "Then maybe you shouldn't go at all." Bo was taken aback and didn't respond. His expression darkened, and he stepped on the gas, speeding away. That night, Lu Chengyuan casually remarked, "Actually, I know everything." With the window open and the sports car speeding, Bo could hardly recall if he really said those words. Her heart held secrets, and in the rushing night, danger seemed to lurk just beneath the surface. Feeling uneasy around Lu Chengyuan, she was caught off guard by his decision to send someone to follow her. She had always been cautious, yet he treated her like a naive child. When she caught the stalker and confronted Lu Qingyuan about it, he boldly questioned, "Big brother clearly gave you the day off. What are you doing there? Watching from a distance, like some loyal babysitter?" Bo was astonished by his audacity, but felt an unexpected wave of vulnerability. Despite her best efforts to hide it, she thought she masked her discomfort completely. "I was just passing by and heard the baby crying. What's wrong with taking a look?" He scoffed. "You really think you're that involved?" Fired up, she shot back, "And Nan is my best friend. What's wrong with treating the baby like my own?" "Lu Qingyuan, mind your own business. I don't need you acting like a guardian angel just because you saved my life." "Don't pretend to have noble reasons," he sneered, finally revealing, "I have eyes on Hellion. Don't you realize what you're doing? You like Hellion, don't you? You're attracted to your best friend's man, Bo." The shock of his words left her momentarily speechless, her face flushed with anger and the sting of a secret exposed, unable to retort. Hearing the commotion, someone outside asked, "Ninth Master, what's going on?" He kicked the door, barking, "Get lost." Silence fell immediately outside. "When did it happen when?" he muttered, clearly frustrated, recalling that she was the girl he'd known since childhood. He remembered teaching her, growing up together, innocent and carefree. He questioned when she started liking Hellion, why he had never noticed. It felt like a long time ago, before Lu Qingyuan even entered the picture. Who could remember that moment on the Gold Coast in Australia? The lone man on a boat, visible only to her. She had asked in Nan, "Did you see that man in sunglasses on the deck of the white yacht?" But with so many boats around, and Nan was confused and shook her head. And Nan hadn't seen Hellion, but Hellion had seen Bo. Bo saw Hellion, yet Hellion had not seen her. It was time to finally sever all lingering attachments. Those ethereal, elusive dreams would only end up tightening into a self-imposed cocoon. Bo went to resign. Hellion assumed she was there for work and headed to his study. Gathering her courage, she said, "Young Master Lien, I need to talk to you." A hint of apprehension lingered in her tone. He turned, pausing with a hint of surprise. She rambled on, sharing a jumble of reasons, unsure if he was really listening. It seemed he was only half paying attention, yet he wore a serious expression. "You're with Lu Jiao?" he suddenly interrupted. Bo was momentarily taken aback, letting out a soft, "Aw." He flashed a faint smile, his signature expression, and said, "Okay, that's settled. You can go back now." After standing there for a moment, she realized this was indeed the expected procedure, so she left. Hellion spread out the day's newspapers on the table. Someone emerged from the study and whispered, "What about Lu Jiao's matter?" "Let's put it on hold for now." The person looked displeased. "Is it because of Bo?" Hellion didn't deny it, still organizing the papers, replying softly, "I've never liked Lu Jiao. If he hadn't meddled, you wouldn't have married the wrong person." Claiming it was a mistake in the investigation? Who believes that? He knows your temperament well. Once the bride price was given, he would take responsibility for the girl. Otherwise, how could he be so audacious? The more he spoke, the angrier he became, rolling up his sleeves as he continued, "I've held this in for too long." Hellion slammed his palm down on the table. "Lu Wu, do you want Nan to die with regrets?" But Lu Wu wasn't intimidated and yelled back, "You brought this on yourself. Trying to please both sides will only lead you to Lu Jiao in the end." He huffed off angrily. Lu Jiao's behind-the-scenes manipulations were not lost on him. He knew very well that after she took the baby, Lu Jiao had gone to great lengths to make Bo believe he was the demon trying to harm her. But he would never truly harm her, saying he wanted to destroy her was just a moment of anger. During those days when the baby was taken away, he wished she would never be found, giving him an honest reason to keep searching for her. But in the end, his wish was not granted. He had spent his life burdened by his own choices. His brothers said he valued loyalty, but He was just a pitiful creature trying to maintain his reputation. Helion stood quietly for a moment, hearing the baby cry from the nursery. He walked over, picking up the child and rocking her gently. 2 years later, Lu Chengyuan replaced Helion as the new president of the Somlian Society. Helion died in a gunfight, ultimately falling at Lu Chengyuan's hands. Lu Chengyuan handed Helion's child to Bo. Since you want to keep the promise you made to a Nan, I'll grant you that. You take her child and stay far away from the underworld. He closed his eyes, as if making a significant decision. From now on, stay far away from me. Bo looked at the child and simply replied, okay. She left, and Lu Chengyuan never looked at her again. When Helion died, he had come to understand one truth. To stand at the pinnacle of power, he had to forsake the torment of love. All he hoped for was that in this lifetime, he would never see her again, allowing him to pretend he had never loved her.